we are drilled as church musicians to make sure and sing things that the people can participate in. Hence the big push for so many hymns within the Mass itself, because often, the hymns are familiar, people will sing them, check. They're like, good, success. Like, we got the people to participate. But this is actually unnecessary when you consider how much singing the congregation is actually meant to do at a typical Sunday Mass. When you look at the dialogue parts between priest and people, plus all of the sung ordinaries, that's quite a lot of singing. Any more than that, and a person can start to feel bombarded or exhausted. Even if the choir alone sang the whole of the proper every Sunday, the people should not be missing out. They have their parts, which shall not be taken away from them. But besides actively singing or listening to scripture, they are also aided in their prayer by meditative pauses, which the singing of the propers provides. We as the musicians are helping the people to actually participate. So the word, because we can lift their hearts to God by our music. But I say actually because actuoso is the word in Latin that's used in the documents when it talks about, what is commonly referred to as active participation, which, active participation is it's a good concept, but it's more getting to the heart of what they were saying when you translate that word actuoso as actual, which means interior and exterior, It's not, and so chant, even if it's in Latin, even if the choir is singing some of it alone, you don't have to just beat yourself if you don't get the congregation to sing every single thing every single time there's music, because you are still providing them an opportunity to enter into the spirit of the liturgy and to meditate by giving them these pieces to ponder and to soak in while they're sitting there. You don't want to do that to excess, because obviously the church, they don't want the choir taking over all that. So the people definitely retain their parts, and you should incorporate their participation as much as possible, even into the proper. There are parishes that have, they have books of the propers in the pews, like in settings that are easier for a congregation to participate in, and they're singing the antiphons and the verses back and forth with the people. I think that's great. That's definitely something the church wants to see happen where it's possible. But this is still not, you're not falling down on the job if you're doing Latin propers and just letting them kind of sit there and rest in that. It's really still helping their hearts connect with God. As liturgical musicians, we can participate in the Mass to a very great degree. We are actually serving it in a high sung Mass, both in the ordinary and the extraordinary forms. And they really need us in order to be as full and beautiful as they can be, which is humbling. It's wow. The priest sings a lot in a high Mass, either form, but really to have everything there, you need someone to lead the singing to help the congregation, and that's the choir. And it's wow, you're actually serving the Mass. You're not in the sanctuary, but in the ordinary form, especially because you are not just repeating texts that the priest has already spoken, and you are saying them. That's your part, and you're providing that musically by singing them. And so you're even more of a servant of the liturgy in the Novus Ordo than in the 1962 Mass, where, everything the choir is saying, the priest was repeating on his own. He was doing it, and we were just sort of singing over top to make it prettier. Which, it still benefited the Mass, but you weren't as essential to the celebration. Your participation was not as important. And so it's, and music, sacred music is described, it's the only art that's described as integral to the liturgy. It's not actually essential to it, because obviously you can have the liturgy without any music at all, and it's still fully there. But integral is really important, and none of the other arts are described in that way. Music is a really big deal in the Catholic Church. And so that's just an amazing thing to be able to participate in as a liturgical musician. And again, that Musicae Sacrae by Pope Pius XII, talking about the reward of apostles that will be given to the faithful liturgical musician who fulfills that work as a genuine apostolate. That's amazing. Just sit on that and think about it for a while. We're not called to any little thing. If we're involved in this, if God has given you the opportunity to provide sacred music for the liturgy, this is something really, to kind of approach with fear and trembling. Definitely you leave yourself behind, and you're entering into this in a humble spirit, because what a gift has been given you, and an opportunity to serve God's people in this way, to serve him, to co-serve, the Mass directly. It's like really amazing. It's very humbling. And so, yeah, just something to think about. And so again, this means that the completely sung liturgy has always been the highest form of the church's worship and her ideal. So it's what we should all be striving for, even though it's kind of a tall order. And again, it means encouraging and helping our priests to sing their parts, because a faithful following of the church's regulations regarding singing in the Mass means that we shouldn't really be singing anything else until after the priest is chanting his parts. So it's definitely a goal to work towards, and it can't be achieved right away in every case. So while we work with that, whatever we have, let's sing whatever we can, but not neglect our priest and his part as our leader in the sacred rites. There's definitely a dynamic that happens when the priest steps into that role of chanting in the Mass. However he does it, if he's out of tune, or if he's just, even kind of trembly and weak, because he's shy about it, it's like people, they understand that a priest isn't necessarily a professional musician, but he's their father, and they will sing back to that in a way that no choir is going to elicit participation from a congregation. It's just not the same, because the choir isn't the father and the shepherd and the director. He's unique, and he's very pivotal. And so it totally makes sense in the order of things that the priest should be the one leading the singing. He doesn't have to intone, the pieces that the choir sings if he's not comfortable with that. There's exceptions to be made for that in the norms if he's not able or willing to intone. But whatever he does, also I heard a priest one time tell me, someone came up to him after Mass and they said, "Oh, Father, I just loved your singing during Mass." And he said, "I don't sing, I chant." Because he's like, I know I'm not a singer. I'm not really musical, and I'm not really that good. And so he's like, I won't say that I sing, but I can chant. Chanting is what a priest does in the Mass, and I can do that. And even if it isn't perfect, I know it's important, and I'm still going to do it. He's just very humble about it. And I just always remembered that because it's different. You can even use different terms to describe it. Chanting isn't necessarily singing, and every priest can chant, and it doesn't matter what they sound like, because that's not why they're supposed to chant. It's just to wow people. It's like the sacred liturgy is still elevated by singing, even if it's recto tono, which is everything on one note. That's permissible if that's all you can do. And so, yeah, just encourage your priests, because we again have a lot that we can offer to them, encouraging them or coaching them, providing them resources and things that they don't have time to look up for themselves, and just being like, I've had priests over to my house, or my parents' house when I lived at home, and my mom and I would be sitting on either side, and the priest is sitting and with the Roman Missal, and we're singing through all of his parts and just helping him practice and get oriented to what's in there and how to do it. And it's like, so what if it doesn't come out perfectly when he sings it at Mass later? But they really appreciated that time and effort spent, and that it really built their confidence, and it just encouraged them, like, lay people care about this, and the church cares about this, and I can do this. Like, I can do it better than I thought. Priests are really built up by our encouragement. They're really discouraged by our criticism or our doubt of them. So I just encourage you to be there for your priest, because they really need us. Again, I have a quote from Professor William Mahrt of the CMAA. He says, "If the priest sings his parts of the Mass and the congregation responds, the singing of the congregation and the singing of the choir will be perceived as an integral part of the liturgy. If the priest speaks his parts, the singing of the congregation and the singing of the choir will be perceived as incidental and additional. The integration of the liturgy is achieved by the priest's celebration in singing." So that kind of says a lot. So anyway, I just want to leave you on that note. At the end of the sacred music colloquiums that the CMA would put on, there was always sort of a closing speech that kind of just summarized what you had learned that week and talked about. And they would always say, basically, go home and teach your priests, help your priests to sing the Mass. Like that's your number one mission from this. You take everything you know and go help your priest, because that's our job as liturgical musicians. We've got to support the priest. We've got to serve the liturgy, but doing that by supporting our priest. And you can do it, even if it takes a little inventiveness, or you have to wait a little while till they're ready, or, whatever. But just however you can do that, I encourage you also to have that same mission and in mind, put on the mind of the church. And as her obedient servant, just let God's grace work through you wherever you're at, and to do whatever you can to help, because this is part of the glorious calling of being members of the church. We don't have to sit around and just wait for priests and bishops to do everything. They can't. And there's a reason why there's faithful and laity in the church, and there's so much that we can do. So I just really want to encourage you, and thank you for taking the time to go through this workshop. And I might do a follow-up video to kind of wrap things up with where I talk about more resources that you can use. But for now, this is kind of the end of the informational, textual, picking through the different sacred documents of the church on music. There's more than I mentioned, but this is a place to get you started. And I highly recommend you go read these documents for yourself, because it's a really enriching experience, and it's just good. You got to get that backbone in your formation so that you know where you're headed and what tools that you have to use. And so anyway, thank you again so much, and God bless you, and keep on singing and chanting. Goodbye.